So the prognosis of the Pope's health remains reserved. And this has been the evening bulletin that's been published over the last number of days. I can tell you last week that seriously, the news that I was getting is that he was dying and near death. And that's not, that wasn't gossip. That was actually what some medics were saying. And people close to the fact. But I suppose like in any prognosis, any doctor will say when he's given a prognosis on a situation, it's not an exact science. And some people, they say, well, you have 3 years to live and they die in a year. And others, they say you have 1 year to live and they're still alive after 5. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. But those that are that deal with elderly people that are and that type of condition say that it was extremely serious. But the whole situation of not being able to, the Pope not appearing in public over the last nearly 2 weeks now has kind of cascaded onto the next topic on the agenda is who will be the next Pope. And over the last 4 years, we've had this project of Pope Francis, which is synodality. And listening to people that I know who were in the synodal hall, not any Irish delegates before people were running up, but other delegates for other countries, and hearing their comments about what they experienced inside the hall during synodality, they thought it was a humongous waste of time. But we have to give the Pope benefit of the doubt in the sense that, there might be something that comes out of this process that the Pope didn't intend to do, when he kicked off this project, So we don't know where it's going to ultimately end up. And I suppose I'm going to side with Gamaliel. If it's from God, it will bear fruits and it will progress on. And if it's not from God, it'll just be another, church failed project that'll sit in the history books of the church. We don't know, but it was interesting when the Pope was kicking off synodality. We had, some curious things happening in the church. At the one time, he was saying, I'm going to make my own employees, I'm going to get rid of my own Vatican lay employees if they do not take the vaccine. Do you remember that time, that year? There was no mercy for them, and I'm talking about employees with children. If they didn't take the vaccine, working in the Vatican, they would be made unemployed. Like the Swiss Guards, they had to leave their employment because they refused to take a vaccine. And the Pope was very heartless that year. He was very authoritarian, especially when you had the disease, right? Because people forget the discussions that we weren't allowed to talk about then. I know I have friends that work in the Vatican and they said I had COVID, but the green pass only lasts 6 months and after that you have to take a vaccine. And they couldn't understand how I've had a disease and yet now I have to take a vaccine, but I don't want to take a vaccine. I've already had the disease. And it was like science was thrown out the door. And at the other side, you had people that didn't want to take the vaccine because of its remote connection to abortion. It was either tested on HEX cells or HEX cells were used in its production, etc., etc. And while it's remote, there's still a connection there. And other people just didn't want to take it because it wasn't tested. They didn't know what the long-term impacts would be, especially if you're a young woman. What's the impacts of this medication on your fertility? I don't think the Pope really was very synodal in actually listening to the valid reasons why people didn't want to do this. But it was very authoritarian being imposed in Italy. And the Pope, was even more authoritarian than many countries. But that was what was happening at the start of synodality. People really have to think about it. The Pope was banning the Latin Mass. No synodality there, no no dialogue, no discussion. It would have been something interesting to bring into the synodal discussion. No, I'm having a survey of the world's bishops that's going to remain private. Oh God, really? Wouldn't it have been good for Catholics to actually have seen that survey, to see what bishops were saying, and then maybe to learn from it, instead of, being called a nostalgic disease, and these are rigid people with backward looking people. Wow, what's going on here in the church? And I'm sorry if I'm a bit aggrieved here, but or I sound aggrieved. People say you're very anti-Pope Francis. I just think as a leader of the Catholic Church, you should tread carefully on these things, especially in dividing the church, which did happen on the COVID era and during the COVID era. But I suppose time will tell on that thing. But the question has arisen now: who will be the next pope? And I suppose I want to ask the question to Catholics, because we are now in a synodal church, whether we like it or not. This is, part of the magisterium. The last synodal document was a magisterial document. So, what happens when Pope Francis II steps out on the loggia and he is Cardinal Grech or Cardinal Hollerich? So what happens if we have a second Jesuit Pope, Cardinal Hollerich, or the synodalist Cardinal Grech, or for hypothetically a cardinal, I don't know, maybe the bishop of the Bishop of Washington, the Archbishop of Washington. Like, what would be the Catholic response to a cardinal like this? Would it be that we just continue on as normal, or would people say, well, we don't accept this cardinal because of his previous statements on such and such and such a subject? I suppose when Pope Francis appeared in 2013, there was kind of this, okay, we don't know much about Pope Francis at the time. And, stuff leaked out years later. But at the time it was, guarded response at the time. But as the pontificate crept on, he has created more and more and more discussion. I know religious groups in the church that have no love for him at all, which is strange. I mean, they'll issue the public statements, but privately speaking, they don't read his documents. They don't quote him in his homilies. It's just strange. This papacy is just strange end to end for me. When I look back at Pope Benedict, when I look back at John Paul II, or even Paul VI, although I was just a child at the time, this papacy has been a strange experience. And it's in that sphere I say he could be the greatest pope ever, in the sense that the law of unintended consequences of what he's doing, because the church seems to be becoming more and more conservative. Young seminarians and young priests are more and more conservative. Traditional groups are growing more and more. I mean, we saw that notice of 50 religious in Scotland being made homeless because the bishop, who is a complete fan of the new liturgy, he studied the new liturgy. He has no heart for the old liturgy, and they probably, he doesn't want them in his diocese, and he's got the right to get rid of them, and that's okay. It'll be good for their humility. It'll be good for the humility of these Franciscans, and I don't think people should worry too much about it. They'll find a home somewhere. But it's just been an interesting few years, and maybe this is good for the church. Maybe this is good. People will say, Robert, what are you thinking today? Because it's going to ask a lot of Catholics who love the faith one question: what is the faith? What is the faith? What is the purpose of the church's institutions? What is the purpose of the ministerial priesthood? What is the purpose of the cardinals, of the bishops? What is, it's all boils down to what is the apostolic faith? And what is it meant for? We're in, the synodality has been an interesting exercise, and it may bear fruits, it may not. I suppose we'll have to see, and in the full light of history. But I'm going to ask, guys, get your speak in now about who you think should be the next pope. We never thought about this in 2013, but I think a lot of Catholics are awake now. Do you think it would be good to have a Cardinal Hollerich as pope? I don't. Or Cardinal Grech? Absolutely not. Who should lead? Who should be the replace Pope Francis? It's a synodal church, so why don't we give our feedback? And I certainly think they should. The person we need as Pope is somebody who has union with God, who's in a state, an illuminative, the unitive state of their spiritual life, who's able to lead us to union with God, inspire us to union with God. The purpose of the church is to save souls, is to disciple us on the spiritual path to union with God. That is the essence, because no other institution can do this. No other institution can do this. And if we are discipled into becoming another Christ, then the mission of the church will go forward, which is caring for the poor, which Christ had so much love for. If we are in a state of union with God, we go out and do as Christ did. The mission of the church accomplishes itself. But the church seems to be wanting to do, the church wants to do the church's mission. Like the Pope Francis wants to do the church's mission. But he doesn't want to lead us on the homework. First, you have to go into the desert. You have to be the St. Paul, or you have to be like the disciples, to go through that apprenticeship of becoming like Christ in order to accomplish the church's mission. And in order to do that, you have to go back to the bread and butter of the spiritual life, which is a process of conversion. And the church needs to get back to teaching the basics of the faith in order to form disciples. Can't sidestep this. I know it's unpopular today in the church to say, we don't give communion to divorced and remarried. And it's unpopular to say that marriage is between a man and a woman. And it's unpopular to say that sex is part of is for producing children. I know these are daft, antiquated, unpopular things to actually say. It's, but Christ didn't shy away from saying these things. If you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. If you're continuously thinking about money, this is your new idol. This is your new god. This is your new idolatry. That you cannot buy, because what we're falling into is this spirit of church activism, because we all want to do good things. We all want a better world. We all want social justice. Who wouldn't want a better society, a better world? I mean, in that sense, the Pope is very, very clear. He does want a better world, and that's a good thing that he's trying to do. But we fall into, what I've fallen into, is religious activism that doesn't lead you to actually accomplishing the church's mission. It's a compromise. It's a halfway house. yeah, I'm doing lots of things, but I'm not doing them as Christ did. You know? And so we need to turn this on its head, and the church's mission has to stop being synodal and more about being Christ-centered. Put the end of the church, the mission of the church first, which is what? What is the mission of the church to save souls? How are we going to accomplish this? By bringing people to union with God, creating saints. The saints transform the world. Start creating St. Francis's, St. Mother Teresa's, St. Jean Vianney's, St. Maximilian Kolbe's, St. Teresa of Lisieux, St. Teresa of Avila's, St. Claret. We start creating it's God that does this, but if the church accomplishes this mission, the mission of Christ goes out. Unless we have a pope that puts that end first. Instead of synodality, because the church is dividing itself. The world is dividing itself. When we think about it. We need pastors to teach us the spiritual path. And we do not have pastors that do that are bold enough to actually do this. There was Austin Ivory was putting up a post about Bishop Barron, reaching how many subscribers on YouTube, and he says, are these fruits and stuff like that. He was a bit critical of Bishop Barron. And a lot of people are critical of Bishop Barron on his different endeavours. But one thing about him, he is able to express something that he is convicted about. Anytime you listen to a speech or a talk or something like it comes from a place of deep personal conviction. Now, do I agree with everything he says when he goes on Ben Shapiro and he says Christ is the privileged way? I obviously don't. But then you don't knock a guy down for a bad interview. You have to look at his whole work, and he has done an incredible job in the Catholic world in inspiring people to understand sacred scripture more, and he speaks from somewhere of conviction, and he's truly inspiring, although I don't fully understand everything that he's trying to do. But we need more pastors like this to stand up and inspire the world. And if you look at Bishop Barron's project, he's definitely drawing you into that mystery of knowing Christ more. This is his project. This is what he's trying to do. Now, nobody who does things like this, you can't make an omelette without breaking the eggs, and sometimes you're never going to get it perfect. But he's a work in progress, and he is truly inspiring. We need to do this in the church, guys. We need to inspire a new generation to create other Christs. That's what the church does. Some people were asking, oh, you guys are stuck. You want a nostalgic era, which an age of the church that never existed. If you ask me what was the golden era of Catholicism, there never existed a golden era of Catholicism. The church has always been in crisis. From day one to today. The church is, because the mission has never been completed. If you ask, what would be the era that I would like to live in of the church, would be to walk with Christ. But then again, you're walking to your own crucifixion by doing that, as all of the apostles were killed, bar John. And even John didn't have an easy life, the poor lad, the youngest of the apostles. As I said, I'm saying this with love for the church. After this Pope goes, what message do I give to the new bishops? Or to the cardinals? Is lead us to union with God. Teach us the path to union with God. Put that at the centre of the church. Create mentor us onto that path, what the saints have been talking about. And the mission of the church will go forth. The church will be transformed. We don't need this activism of social justice. This because which will ultimately burn Catholics out. Will frustrate them. It will frustrate the church. Because hold on a second. First do the basics, and then it will go forth. And it wasn't discussed in synodality. When I saw the Irish synodal document, I said, great exam of the state of the Irish church. We have lost it. We don't understand the basics of the Catholic faith. Sanctifying grace, conversion. Who has taught them? Nobody. Because maybe that's the good thing that's going to come out of this papacy. It highlights how far we have departed from the true mission of the church. And God will call us back to that mission. Maybe we will have a Pope Francis II come out, another Jesuit, or Cardinal Grech, or Cardinal McElroy. Can you imagine? Who knows? You will need a lot more. With 138 cardinal electors at the moment, you will need a very, very large number of cardinals to elect the next pope. But we need a pope who is a saint, who is in the state of unitive, the unitive state of grace, of the spiritual life. And I'm going to ask a silly question. When you look at the Culvenbach report that was issued when Bergoglio was being considered as a bishop, you have to ask the question, how does this ring with somebody who's going to be made a bishop? I mean, questions have been asked. I do think the Pope, intends well. But, this has been a strange papacy. Anyway, pray for the church. And I give this in good faith, but I'm kind of challenging people to think, what is the purpose of the church? What is the purpose of the church? Christ speaks so much about the spiritual life, the spiritual aspect of our life. And the church is the only institution that can form that part. But, the world would be transformed if we actually went back to do the mission of the church. Nobody will give their life for an idea of Christ. Nobody will persevere for an idea of Christ. Perseverance comes from true union with God. And we need to teach that again to this world. We need leaders to be other Christs. And Christ would not have done what Pope Francis has done during his pontificate. Christ would not have issued a document like Fiducia Supplicans. Christ would not have issued that caused the confusion like Amoris Laetitia. He wouldn't have lowered the barrier. He would have given us the truth in charity. He wouldn't have lied to us. He wouldn't have fired his own employees because they refused to take a treatment. I know popes, but it's something that we need to reflect on. We need a holy pope, a man with union with God, and a man that can transform this world. Do we have one in the College of Cardinals? I think we do. But does the College of Cardinals have the guts to actually elect a saint as next pope? Or another ideologist to continue on a program? Guys, where are we going? Anyway, God bless you. Take care. Bye bye.